Open a bottle of bubbly. Yeah. Here's to another goddamn new year. And outside, 2 million drunk Bostonians are getting ready to sing Auld Lang Syne out of tune. I sit there in my easy chair, looking at the clouds, orange with celebration. I wonder if you're out there. Hey! The ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light, midday or night. I slip on it every time. Open the third bottle of bubbly. Yeah, and I take that bottle of champagne, go into the kitchen, stand in front of the kitchen window, and I take all my clothes off, take that bottle of champagne, and I pour it on my head, feel a cascade through my hair and across my chest, and the phone rings. And it's my mother. And she says, "Hi, honey, how's Boston?" And I stand there all alone on New Year's Eve, buck naked, drenched in champagne, looking at a bunch of strangers, looking at them, looking at me, looking at them, and I say, "All fine, Mom. How's Washington? Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light, midday or night, and I slip on it every time." Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light, midday or night, and I slip on it every time, yeah. So I guess the party line is I followed you up here. Well, I don't know about that. Mainly because knowing about that would involve knowing about some pathetic, ridiculous, and absolutely true things about myself. I'd rather not admit to right now. I woke up at 3 a.m. with the radio on, that Gladys Knight and the Pip song on, about how she'd rather live in his world with him than live in her own world alone. And I laid there, head spinning, trying to fall asleep, and I thought to myself, "Oh, Gladys, girl, I love you, but oh, get alive! Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light, midday or night, and I slip on it every time." Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light, midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time.
Both Pat Montesian and Gately's AA sponsor like to remind Gately how this new resident, Jeffrey Day, could end up being an invaluable teacher of patience and tolerance for him, Gately, as Enid House staff. So then at 46 years of age, I came here to learn to live by cliches, is what Day says to Charlotte Treat right after Randy Lance asks what time it was again at 825 hours. To turn my will and life over to the care of cliches, one day at a time. Easy does it. First things first, courage is fear that has said its prayers. Ask for help. Thy will not mine be done. It works if you work it, grow or go, keep coming back. Poor old Charlotte Treat, needle pointing primly beside him on the old vinyl couch that just came from Goodwill, purses her lips. You need to ask for some gratitude. Oh no, but the point is I've already been fortunate enough to receive gratitude. Day crosses one leg over the other in a way that inclines his whole little soft body toward her, for which, believe you me, I am grateful. I cultivate gratitude. That's part of the system of cliches I'm here to live by. An attitude of gratitude. A grateful drunk will never drink. I know the actual cliche is a grateful heart will never drink, but since organs can't properly be said to imbibe, and I'm still afflicted with just enough self will to decline to live by other non sequiturs as opposed to just good old cliches, I'm taking the liberty of light amendment. He gives with this a look like butter wouldn't melt, albeit grateful amendment, of course. Charlotte Treat looks over to Gately for some sort of help or staff reinforcement of dogma. The poor bitch is clueless. All of them are clueless still. Gately reminds himself that he too is probably mostly still clueless, still, even after all these hundreds of days. I didn't know that I didn't know is another of the slogans that looks so shallow for a while and then all of a sudden drops off and deepens, like the lobster waters off the North Shore. As Gately fidgets his way through daily AM meditation, he always tries to remind himself daily that this is all an Enid House residency is supposed to do. Buy these poor yutzes some time, some thin pie slice of abstinent time, till they can start to get a whiff of what's true and deep, almost magic under the shallow surface of what they're trying to do. I cultivate it assiduously. I do special gratitude exercises at night up there in the room. Gratitude ups, you could call them. Ask Randy over there if I don't do them like clockwork, diligently, sedulously. Well, it's true, is all. Treat sniffs about gratitude. Everybody else except Gately, lying on the old other couch opposite them, is ignoring this exchange, watching an old interlace cartridge whose tracking is a little messed up so that staticky stripes eat at the screen's picture's bottom and top. Day is done talking. Day is not done talking. Pet M encourages newer staff to think of residents they'd like to bludgeon to death as valuable teachers of patience, tolerance, self discipline, restraint. Day is not done talking. One of the exercises is being grateful that life is so much easier now. I used to think in long compound sentences with subordinate clauses and even the odd polysyllable. Now I find I needn't. Now I live by the dictates of macrame samplers ordered from the back page ad of an old Reader's Digest or Saturday Evening Post. Easy does it. Remember to remember. But for the grace of capital G God, turn it over. Terse, hard boiled, monosyllabic, good old Norman Rockwell, Paul Harvey wisdom. I walk around with my arms out straight in front of me and recite these cliches in a monotone, no inflection necessary. Could that be one? Could that be added to the cliche pool? No inflection necessary? Too many syllables, probably. Randy Lentz says, I ain't got time for this shit. Poor old Charlotte Treat, all of 9 weeks clean, is trying to look primmer and primmer. She looks again over to Gately lying on his back, taking up the living room's whole other sofa, one sneaker up on the sofa's square frayed fabric arm thing, his eyes almost closed. Only staff get to lie on the couches. Denial. Charlotte finally says, "The Nile is not a river in Egypt." "I was about the both of you shut the fuck up," says Emily Minty. Jeffrey, not Jeff, Jeffrey Day has been at Enid House 6 days. He came from Roxbury's infamous Dimmock detox, where he was the only white person, which Gately bets must have been broadening for him. Day has a squished, blank, smeared, flat face, one requiring like great self-effort to like, and eyes that are just starting to lose the nicetated glaze of early sobriety. Day is a newcomer and a wreck. A red wine and quaalude man who finally nodded out in late October and put his sob through the window of a Malden sporting goods store and then got out and proceeded to browse until the finest came and got him. Who thought something horseshit sounding like social historicity or historical sociality at some junior college up the expressway in Medford and came and saying on his intake he also manned the helm of a scholarly quarterly. Word for word, the house manager had said, "Manned the helm," and scholarly. His intake estimated that Day's been in and out of a blackout for most of the last several years, and his wiring is still, as they say, a bit frayed. His detox at Dimmock, where they barely have the resources to give you a Librium if you start to DT, must have been just real grim, because Jeffrey D. alleges it never happened. Now, his story is he just strolled into Enid House on a lark one day from his home, 10 clicks away in Malden, and found the place too hilariously egregious to want to ever leave. It's the newcomers with some education that are the worst, according to Gene M. They identify their whole selves with their head, and the disease makes its command headquarters in the head. Day wears chinos of indeterminate hue, brown socks with black shoes, and shirts that Pat Montesian had described in the intake as Eastern European type Hawaiian shirts. Day's now on the vinyl couch with Charlotte Treat after breakfast in the Enid House living room with a few of the other residents that either aren't working or don't have to be at work early, and with Gately, who pulled an all night dream duty shift out in the front office till 400 hours, then got temp relief by Jeanette Foltz so he could go to work janitoring down at the Chatook shelter till 700, then came and hauled ass back up here and took back over so that Jeanette could go off to her NA thing with a bunch of NA people in what looked like a dune buggy, if the dunes in question were in hell, and is now Gately trying to unclench and center himself inside by tracing the cracks in the paint of the living room ceiling with his eyes. Gately often feels a terrible sense of loss, narcotics wise, in the AM, still, even after his long clean. His sponsor over at the White Flag Group says some people never get over the loss of what they thought was their one true best friend and lover. You just have to pray daily for acceptance and the brass danglers to move forward through the grief and loss, to wait for time to harden the scab. The sponsor, Ferocious Francis G., doesn't give Gately one iota of shit for feeling some negative feelings about it. On the contrary, he commends Gately for his candor in breaking down and crying like a baby and telling him about it early 1 a.m. over the payphone. The sense of loss. It's a myth. No one misses it. Their particular substance. Shit, you wouldn't need help if you didn't miss it. You just have to ask for help and like turn it over the loss and pain to keep coming, show up, pray, ask for help. Gately rubs his eye. Simple advice like this does seem like a lot of cliches. Day's right about how it seems. Yeah. And if Jeffrey Day keeps on steering by the way things seem to him, then he's a dead man for sure. Gately's already watched dozens come through here and leave early and go back out there and then go to jail or die. If Day ever gets lucky and breaks down finally and comes to the front office at night to scream that he can't take it anymore and clutch at Gately's pant cuff and blubber and beg for help at any cost, Gately will get to tell Day the things is that the cliche directives are a lot more deep and hard to actually do, to try and live by instead to just say. But he'll only get to say it if Day comes and asks. Personally, Gately gives Jeffrey D like a month. at the outside before he's back tipping his hat to parking meters. Except who is Gately to judge? Who'll end up getting the gift of the program versus who won't? He needs to remember. He tries to feel like Day is teaching him patience and tolerance. It takes great patience and tolerance not to want to punt the soft little guy out into the Commonwealth Avenue ravine and open up his bunk to somebody that really desperately wants it. The gift. Except who's Gately to think he can know who wants it and who doesn't deep down? Gately's arm is behind his head, up against the sofa's other arm. The old DEC viewer is on to something violent and color enhanced. Gately neither sees nor hears. It was part of his gifts as a burglar. He can sort of turn his attention on and off like a light. Even when he was a resident here, he had his prescient housebreaker's ability to screen input, to do sensory triage. It was one reason he'd even been able to stick out his 9 residential months here with 21 other newly detoxed housebreakers, hoods, whores, fired execs, Avon ladies, subway musicians, beer bloated construction workers, vagrants, indignant car salesmen, bulimic trauma mamas, bunko artists, mincing pillow biters, North End hard guys, pimply kids with electric nose rings, denial ridden housewives, and etc., all jonesing and head gaming and mocus and grieving and basically whacked out and producing non stopping output 24/7, 365. At some point in here, Day's saying, so bring on the lobotomist, bring him on, I say. Except Gately's own counselor when he was a resident here, Eugenio Martinez, one of the volunteer alumni counselors, a one-eared former boiler room bunco man and now a cellular phone retailer who'd hooked up with the house under the original founder guy that didn't even use his first name and had about 10 years clean, Gene M. did. Eugenio lovingly confronted Gately early on about his special burglar selective attention and about how it could be dangerous because how can you be sure it's you doing the screening and not the spider? Gene called the disease the spider and talked about feeding the spider versus starving the spider, and so on and so forth. Eugenio M. had called Gately into the house manager's back office and said, what if Don's screening input turned out to be feeding the old spider? And what about an experimental unscreening of input for a while? Gately had said he'd do his best to try and come back out and try to watch a spont descem of the Celtics while two resident pillow biters from the Fenway were having this involved conversation about some third fag having to go in and get the skeleton of some kind of fucking rodent removed from inside their butthole. The unscreening experiment had lasted half an hour. This was right before Gately got his 90-day chip and wasn't exactly wrapped real tight or real tolerant still. And it housed this year is nothing like the freak show it was when Gately went through. Gately has been completely substance free for 421 days today. Miss Charlotte Treat, with a carefully made up ruined face, is watching the viewer's stripe shot cartridge while she needlepoints something. Conversation between her and Jeffrey D has mercifully petered out. Day is scanning the room for somebody else to engage and piss off so he can prove to himself he doesn't fit in here and stay separated off isolated inside himself and maybe get them so pissed off there's a beef and he gets bounced out. And it wouldn't be his fault. You can almost hear his disease chewing away inside his head, feeding. Emily Minty, Randy Lance, and Bruce Green are also in the room, sprawled in spring shot chairs, lighting one gasper off the end of the last. Their postures that don't fuck with me slouch on off the streets that here makes their body's texture somehow hard to distinguish from that of the chairs. Nell Gunter is sitting at the long table in the doorless dining room that opens out right of the old DEC fold-out teepee's pine stand, whitening under her nails with a manicure pencil amid the remains of something she's eaten that involved serious syrup. But Bert F. Smith is also in there, way down by himself at the table's far end, trying to saw at a waffle with a knife and fork attached to the stumps of his wrists with Velcro bands. A long time ago, former DMV driver's license examiner Bert F. Smith is 45 and looks 70, has almost all white hair that's waxy and yellow from clothes odor, smoke, and finally got into Janet House last month after 9 months stuck in the Cambridge City shelter. Bert F. Smith's story is he's making his like 50th odd stab at sobriety in AA. Once devoutly RC, Bert FS has potentially lethal trouble with faith in a loving God ever since the RC Church apparently granted his wife an annulment in like BS 99 after 15 years of marriage. Then, for several years, a rooming house drunk, which on Gately's view is about like one step up from a homeless person type drunk, Bert FS got mugged and beaten half to death in Cambridge on Christmas Eve of last year and left there to like freeze there in an alley in a storm and ended up losing his hands and feet. Dooney Glynn's been observed telling Bert FS things like that there's some new guy coming into the disabled room off Pat's office with Bert FS who's without not only hands and feet, but arms and legs and even a head and who communicates by farting in Morse code. This sally earned Glynn 3 days full house restriction and a week's extra chore for what Jeanette Falls described in the log as extensive cruelty. There's a vague intestinal moaning in Gately's right side. Watching Bert F. Smith smoke a Benson and Hedges by holding it between his stumps with his elbows out like a guy with pruning shears is an adventure in fucking pathos as far as Gately's concerned. And Jeffrey Day cracks wise about there but for grace. And forget about what it's like trying to watch Bert F. Smith try and light a match. Gately, who's been on live-in staff 4 months now, believes Charlotte Treat's devotion to needlepoint is suspect. All those needles, in and out of all that thin, sterile white cotton stretched drum tight in its round frame. The needle makes a kind of thud and squeak when it goes in the cloth. It's not much like the soundless pop and slide of a real cook and shoot, but still, she takes such great care. Gately wonders what color he'd call the ceiling if forced to call it a color. It's not white, it's not gray. The brown yellow tones are from high tar gaspers. A pal hangs up near the ceiling even this early in the new sober day. Some of the drunks and trank jockeys stay up most of the night, jogging their feet and chain smoking, even though there's no cartridges or music allowed after midnight. He has that odd house staffer's knack, Gately, already after 4 months of seeing everything in both living and dining rooms without really looking. Emily Minty, a hardcore smack addict punk here for reasons nobody can quite yet pin down, is in an old mustard collared easy chair with his combat boots up on one of the standing ashtrays, which is tilting not quite enough for Gately to tell him to watch out, please. Minty's orange mohawk and the shaved skull around it are starting to grow out brown, which is just not a pleasant sight in the morning at all. The other ashtray on the floor by his chair is full of the ragged little new moons of bitten nails, which has got to mean that the Hester tea that he'd ordered to bed at 2:30 was right back down here in the chair going at her nails again the second Gately left to mop shit at the shelter. When he's up all night, Gately's stomach gets all tight and acidy from either all the coffee maybe or just staying up. Minty's been on the streets like he was like 16. Gately can't tell. He's got that sooty complexion homeless guys get, where the soot has insinuated itself into the dermal layer and thickened, making Minty look somehow upholstered. And the big armed driver for leisure time ice, the quiet kid, green, a garbage head, all substance type kid, maybe 21, face every slightly smudged in on one side, wear sleeveless khaki shirts, and had lived in a trailer in that apocalyptic Enfield trailer park out near the Alston Spur. Gately likes Green because he seems to have got sense enough to keep his map shut when he's got nothing important to say, which is basically all the time. The tattoo on the kid's right tricep is a spear-pierced heart over the hideous name Mildred Bonk, who Bruce G. told him was a ray of living light and a dead ringer for the late lead singer of the Fiends in human shape, and his dead heart's one love ever, and who took their daughter and left him this summer for some guy that told her he ranched fucking longhorn cows east of Atlantic City, New Jersey. He's got, even by Enid House standards, major league sleep trouble, Green. And he and Gately play cribbage sometimes in the wee dead hours, a game Gately picked up in jail. Bert FS is now hunched in a meaty coughing fit, his elbows out and his forehead purple. No sign of Hester Thrale, nail biter, and something Pat calls borderline. Gately can see everything without moving or moving his head or either eye. Also in there is Randy Lance, who Lance is a small time organic coke dealer who wears sports coats rolled up over his parlor tanned forearms and is always checking his pulse on the inside of his wrists. It's come out that Lance is of keen interest to both sides of the law because this past May he'd apparently all of a sudden lost all control and holed up all of a sudden in a Charleston motel and freebased most of a whole 100 grams. He'd been fronted by a suspiciously trusting Brazilian, and what Lance didn't know was supposed to have been a DEA sting operation in the South End. Having screwed both sides in what Gately secretly views as a delicious fuck up, Randy Lance has, since May, been the most wanted he's probably ever been. He's seedily handsome in the way of pimps and low level coke dealers, muscular in the MP ish way that certain guys' muscles look muscular but can't really lift anything, with complexly gelled hair and the little bird like head movements of the deeply vein. One forearm's hair has a little hairless patch, which Gately knows he'll well spells knife owner. And if there's one thing Gately's never been able to stomach, it's a knife owner. Little swaggery guys that always queer a square beef and come up off the ground with a knife and where you have to get cut to take it away from them. Lentz is teaching Gately reserved politeness to people you pretty much want to beat up on sight. It's pretty obvious to everybody except Pat Montesian, whose odd gullibility in the presence of human sludge, though Gately needs to try to remember, had been one of the reasons why he himself had got into Enid House originally. Obvious that Lentz is here mostly just to hide out. He rarely leaves the house, except under compulsion, avoids windows, and travels to the nightly required AANA meetings in a disguise that makes him look like Cesar Romero after a terrible accident. And then he always wants to walk back to the house solo afterward, which is not encouraged. Lentz is seated low in the northeasternmost corner of an old fake velour love seat. He's jammed in the northeasternmost corner of the living room. Randy Lance has a strange, compulsive need to be north of everything, and possibly even northeast of everything, and Gately has no clue what it's about, but observes Lentz's position routinely for his own interest and files. Lentz's leg, like Ken Erditi's leg, never stops joggling. Day claims it joggles even worse in sleep. Another gurgle and abdominal chug for Don G lying there. Charlotte Treat has violently red hair, as in hair the color of like a red crayon. The reason she doesn't have to work an outside menial job is she's got some strain of the virus or like HIV. Former prostitute, reformed. Why do prostitutes, when they get straight, always try and get so prim? It's like long repressed librarian ambitions come flooding out. Charlotte T has a cut rate whore's hard, half pretty face, her eyes lassoed with shadow around all four lids, her also with a case of the dermal layer sooty complexion. The riveting thing about Treat is how her cheeks are deeply pitted in these deep trenches that she packs with foundation and tries to cover over with blush, which, along with the hair, gives her the look of a mean clown. The ghastly wounds in her cheeks look for all the world like somebody got at her with a wood burning kit at some point in her career path. Gately would rather not know. Don Gately's almost 29 and sober and just huge. Lying there gurgling and inert with a fluttery eyed smile. One shoulder blade and buttock pooch out over the side of a sofa that sags like a hammock. Gately looks less built than poured, the smooth immovability of an Easter Island statue. It would be nice if intimidating size wasn't one of the major factors in a male alumni getting offered the male live-in staff job here, but there you go. Don G has a massive square head, made square looking by the Prince Valiantish haircut he tries to maintain himself in the mirror to save dollars. Room and board aside, plus the opportunity for service, he makes very little as an Enid House staffer and is paying off restitution schedules in 3 different district courts. He has the fluttery, wide eyed smile now of someone who's holding himself just over the level of doze. Pat Montesian is due in at 900 hours, and Don G can't go to bed until she arrives because the house manager has driven Jennifer Belbin to a court appearance downtown, and he's the only staffer here. Faults, the female live in staffer, is at a Narcotics Anonymous convention in Hartford for the long Interdependence Day weekend. Gately personally is not hot on NA. So many relapses and unhumble returns, so many war stories told with non disguised bullshit pride, so little emphasis on service or serious message. All these people in leather and metal, preening, rooms full of Randy Lances, all hugging each other, pretending they don't miss the substance. Rampant newcomer fucking. There's a difference between abstinence and recovery, Gately knows. Except, of course, who's Gately to judge what works for who? He just knows what seems like it works for him today. AA's tough Enfield Brighton love, the white flag group, old guys with suspended bellies and white crew cuts and geologic amounts of sober time. The crocodiles. That'll take your big square head off if they sense you're getting complacent or chasing tail or forgetting that your life still hangs in the balance every fucking day. White flag newcomers, so crazed and sick they can't sit and have to pace at the meeting's rear, like Gately when he first came. Retired old kindergarten teachers in polyresin slacks and the pince-nez who bake cookies for the weekly meeting and relate from behind the podium how they used to blow bartenders at closing for just 2 more fingers in a paper cup to take home against the morning's needled light. Gately, albeit an oral narcotics man from way back, has committed himself to AA. He drank his fair share too, he figures, after all. Executive Director Pat M. is due in at 900 hours and has application interviews with 3 people, 2 female, 1 male, who better be showing up soon. And Gately will answer the door when they don't know enough to just come in and will say welcome and get them a cup of coffee if he judges them able to hold it. He'll get them aside and tip them off to be sure to pet Pat M's dogs during the interview. They'll be sprawled all over the front office, sides heaving, writhing, and biting at themselves. He'll tell them it's a proved fact that if Pat's dogs like you, you're in. Pat M has directed Gately to tell appliers this, and then if the appliers do actually pet the dogs, 2 hideous white golden retrievers with suppurating scabs and skin afflictions, plus one has grand mal epilepsy, it'll betray a level of desperate willingness that Pat says is just about all she goes by, deciding. A nameless cat oozes by on the broad windowsill above the back of the fabric couch. Animals here come and go. Alumni adopt them or they just disappear. Their fleas tend to remain. Gately's intestines moan. Boston's dawn coming back on the green line this morning was chemically pink, trails of industrial exhaust blowing due north. The nail parings in the ashtray on the floor are, he realizes now, too big to be from fingernails. These bitten arcs are broad and thick and a deep autumnal yellow. He swallows hard. He tells Jeffrey Dane how, even if they're just cliches are A, soothing, and B, remind you of common sense, and C, license the universal accent that drowns out silence, and 4, silence is deadly, pure spider food if you've got the disease. Gene M says you can spell the disease dis-ease, which sums the basic situation up nicely. Pat has a meeting at the Division of Substance Abuse Services in Government Center at noon. She needs to be reminded about. She can't read her own handwriting, which the stroke affected her handwriting. Gately envisions going around having to find out who's biting their fucking toenails in the living room and putting the disgusting toenail bits in the ashtray at like 500. Plus, house regs prohibit bare feet any place downstairs. There's a pale brown water stain on the ceiling over Day and Treat, the almost exact shape of Florida. Randy Lance has issues with Jeffrey Day because Day is glib and a teacher at a scholarly journal's helm. This threatens the self concept of a Randy Lance that thinks of himself as a kind of hipply sexy artist intellectual. Small time dealers never conceptualize themselves as just small time dealers, kind of like whores never do. For occupation on his intake form, Lenz had put freelance scriptwriter, and he makes a show of that he reads. For the first week here in July, he'd held the books upside down in the northeast corner of whatever room. He had a gigantic medical dictionary he'd haul down and smoke and read until Annie Parrott, the assistant manager, had to tell him not to bring it down anymore because it was fucking with Morris Hanley's mind, at which juncture he quit reading and started talking, making everybody nostalgic for when he just sat there and read. Jeffrey D. has issues with Randy L. Also, you can tell. There's a certain way they don't quite look at each other. And so on. And so now, of course, they're mashed together in the three man together, since three guys in one night missed curfew and came in without one normal sized pupil between them and refused urines and got bounced on the spot. And so Day gets moved up in his first week from the five-man room to the three-man. Seniority comes quick around here. Past Minty, down at the dining room table's end. Bert FS still coughing, still hunched over, his face a dusky purple, and Nell G is behind him, pounding him on the back so that it keeps sending him forward over his ashtray, and he's waving one stump vaguely over his shoulder to try and signal her to quit. Lenson Day, a beef may be brewing. Day'll try to goad Lenson to a beef that'll be public enough so he doesn't get hurt but does get bounced. And then he can leave treatment and go back to Chianti and Ludes and getting assaulted by sidewalks and make out like the relapse is Annette House's fault and never have to confront himself or the disease. To Gately, Day is like a wide open interactive textbook on the disease. One of Gately's jobs is to keep an eye on what's possibly brewing among residents and let Pat or the manager know and try to smooth things down in advance if possible. The ceiling's color could be called dun if forced. Someone has farted. No one knows just who, but this isn't like a normal adult place where everybody coolly pretends a fart didn't happen. Here, everybody has to make their little comment. Time is passing, and it house reeks of passing time. It is the humidity of early sobriety, hanging and palpable. You can hear ticking in clockless rooms here. Gately changes the angle of one sneaker, puts the other arm behind his head. His head has real weight and pressure. Randy Len's obsessive compulsions include the need to be north, a fear of discs, a tendency to constantly take his own pulse, a fear of all forms of timepieces, and a need to always know the time with great precision. Damon, you got the time maybe real quick? Lenz, for the third time in half an hour. Patience, tolerance, compassion, self discipline, restraint. Gately remembers his first 6 months here straight. He felt the sharp edge of every second that went by, and the freak show dreams, nightmares beyond the worst DTs you'd ever heard about. A reason for a night shift staffer in the front office is so somebody's there for the residents to talk at when, not if, when. When the freak show dreams ratchet them out of bed at like 3 in the morning. Nightmares about relapsing, getting high, not getting high, but having everybody think you're high, getting high with your alcoholic mom, then killing her with a baseball bat, whipping the old unit out for a spot urine and starting up and flames coming shooting out, getting high and bursting into flames, having a water spout shaped like an enormous tall suck you up inside, a vehicle explodes in an enhanced bloom of sooty flame on the DEC viewer. It's hooked up like an old pop tap. Dace making a broad gesture out of checking his watch. It was right around 8:30, fella. Randy L's fine nostrils flare and widen. He stares straight ahead, eyes narrowed, fingers on his wrist. Day purses his lips, leg joggling. Gately hangs his head over the arm of the sofa and regards Lentz upside down. That look on your map there means something there, Randy? Or you like communicating something with that look? Does anybody maybe know the time a little bit more exactly is what I'm wondering, Don. Since Day doesn't, Gately checks his own cheap digital, head still hung over the sofa's arm. Well, I got 8:32, 40 seconds, 15 seconds, 16 seconds, Randy. Thanks a lot, DG, man. So, and now Day has that same flared, narrow look for lens. We've been over this, friend, amigo, sport. You do this all the time with me. Again, I'll say it. I don't have a digital watch. This is a fine old antique watch. It points, a memento of far better days. It's not a digital watch. It's not a cesium based atomic clock. It points with hands. See, Spiragno here has two little arms. They point, they suggest. It's not a sodding stopwatch for life. Lens, get a watch. Am I right? Why don't you just get a watch, Lens? Three people I happen to know for a fact have offered to get you a watch, and you can pay them back whenever you feel comfortable about poking your nose out and investigating the worker world. Get a watch, obtain a watch, a fine digital, incredibly wide watch, about 5 times the width of your wrist, so you have to hold it like a falconer and it treats time like pie. Easy does it, Charlotte Treat half sings, not looking up from her needle and frame. Day looks around at her. I don't believe I was speaking to you in any way, shape, or form. Lance stares at him. If you're trying to fuck with me, brother, shakes his fine, shiny head. Big mistake. Oh, I'm all a tremble. I can barely hold my arms steady to read my watch. Big, 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 real big mistake. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men, says Gately, back on his back, smiling at the dun cracked ceiling. He's the one who'd farted. They returned from Long Island bearing their shields rather than upon them, as they say. John Wayne and Hal Incandenza lost only 5 total games between them in singles. The A doubles had resembled spatter painting, and the B teams, especially the distaffs, had surpassed themselves. The whole PWTA staff and squad had to sing a really silly song. Coyle and Trolch didn't win. Teddy Schacht had, incredibly, lost to his squat spin doctory opponent in 3 sets, despite the kid's debilitating nerves at crucial junctures. The fact that Schacht wasn't all that upset got remarked on by staff. Schacht and a conspicuously energized Jim Trolch rallied for the big win in 18A number 2 dubs. Trolch disconnected microphone mysteriously disappeared from his gear bag during post doubles showers to the rejoicing of all. The muley's storky intense 2 hands off both sides opponent had gotten weirdly lethargic and then disoriented in the second set after Pemulis had lost the first in a tiebreak. After the kid had delayed play for several minutes, claiming the tennis balls were too pretty to hit, PWTA junior circuit argued for a victory by default. Trainers had conducted him gently off the court. The fact that Pemulis hadn't walked around with his chest out recounting the win for any ETA females got remarked on only by Hal and T. Axford. Schacht was in too much knee pain to remark on much of anything, and Stitt had ETA's Barry Loach inject the big purple knee with something that made Schacht's eyes roll up in his head. Then, during the post-meet mixer and dance, Pemulis' default opponent ate from the hors d'oeuvre table without using utensils, or at one point even hands, did a disco number when there wasn't any music going, and was finally heard telling the Port Washington headmaster's wife that he'd always wanted to do her from behind. Pemulis spent a lot of time whistling and staring innocently up at the prefab ceiling. The bus for all the 18 squads was warm, and there were little nozzles of light over your seat that you could either have on to do homework or shut off and sleep. Hurlch left eye ominously nystagmic, pretended to recap the day's match highlights for a subscription audience, speaking earnestly into his fist. The C team's Stockhausen was pretending to sing opera. Hal and tall Paul Shaw were each reading an SAT prep guide. A good quarter of the bus was yellow, highlighting copies of E.A. Abbott's inescapable at ETA book Flatland, or for either Flopman or Chirwaf or Thorpe. An elongated darkness with assorted shapes melted by, plus long gauntlets near exits, of tall interstated lamps laying down cones of dirty looking sodium light. The ghastly sodium lamplight made Mario in Candenza happy to be in his little cone of white inside light. Mario sat next to Kitty Coyle, who was kind of mentally slow, especially after a hard loss. And they played rock, paper, scissors for 200 clicks or more, not saying anything, engrossed in trying to locate patterns in each other's rhythms of choices of shapes, which they both decided there weren't any. Two or three upperclassmen in Levi Richardson or Byron Chewov's disciplinary literature were slumped over Goncharov's Oblomov, looking very unhappy indeed. Charles Tavis sat way in the back with John Wayne and beamed and spoke nonstop in hushed tones to Wayne as the Canadian stared out the window. The Lint was with the 16s on bus back. He'd been ragging Stices and Corn span asses since their doubles, which it looked like they practically gave away. The bus was Stittless. Stitt always found a private, mysterious way back, then appeared at dawn drills with the Lint and elaborate workups of everything that had gone wrong the day before. He was particularly shrill and insistent and negative after they'd won something. Schott sat listening to port and didn't respond when hands were waved in front of his face, and Exford and Struck started kibitzing Barry Loach about their knees, were feeling punk as well. The luggage rack over everyone's heads bristled with grips and coverless strings, and liniment and tincture of benzoin had been handed out and liberally applied, so the warm air became complexly spiced. Everybody was tired, in a good way. The homeward ride's camaraderie was marred only by the fact that somewhere near the back of the bus started the passing around of a Gothic fonted leaflet offering the kingdom of prehistoric England to the man who could pull Keith Freer out of Bernadette Longley. Freer had been discovered by pro-rector Mary Esther Thode, more or less Xing poor Bernadette Longley under an Adidas blanket. In the very back seat, on the bus trip to the East Coast Clays in Providence in September, and it had been a nasty scene because there was some basic academy license rule that it was just unacceptable to flout under the nose of staff. Keith Freer was deeply asleep when the leaflet was getting passed around, but Bernadette Longley wasn't. And when the leaflet hit the front half, where all the females now had to sit since September, she buried her face in her hands and flushed even on the back of her pretty neck. And her doubles partner came all the way back to where Jim Struck and Michael Pamulas were sitting and told them in no uncertain terms that somebody on this bus was so immature, it was really sad. Charles Tavis was irrepressible. He did a Pierre Trudeau impersonation. No one except the driver was old enough to laugh at. And the whole mammoth traveling squad, 3 buses worth, got to stop and have the mega breakfast at Denny's over next to Empire Waste at like 30 minutes past midnight when they got in.